Welcome back to the Wrestling Roundtable. It's the season premiere for our second season. I'm your host, Eric Santamaria. It's been about a year since we had our first show when we started from scratch, and I don't think that nearly 2,000 subscribers and almost 500,000 video views later is too bad for guys who just came out of nowhere. And I have a lot of people to thank for that, but that's mainly you in addition to all these guys. In the past year, we've had a lot of great talks. We have had a lot of good conversation, a lot of good jokes too, and we made fun of stroke victims when we weren't making misogynist jokes, and you've stuck with us the entire time. I do want to thank all of you very much for your support. Thank you for watching, thank you for subscribing and spreading the word about the Wrestling Roundtable. I do have to apologize to you firstly before we get onto our topic of the year in review. At the end of the last season, I promised some production upgrades, and we're not quite there yet, but at the next set of tapings in about a month or so, we should have those ready, so just be patient and enjoy the show. But before we get to the topic, introductions first as always. You know me, the host Eric Santamaria, but sitting to my left, which is your right, is Chris Harris, fan of 17 years now and also a screenwriter. And to my right, which is your left, is Lawrence Haber, musician, teacher, and a fan of 23 years. And Rodney Leconte, videographer, filmmaker of 20 years now. Jeez, we've been fans 20 years. And that means we've watched a lot of years of wrestling, but 2008 is the year we're going to talk about. And of course, the guy who was wrestling when we first started watching, before we were even born, Ric Flair, one of the best wrestlers of all time, who happened to retire this year. Now, we did do a show on Ric Flair and his retirement and what he means to wrestling and wrestling fans in general. But of course, since that show, he quit because he wanted to make some more publicity appearances. NWA wanted to induct him in their Hall of Fame, and they were like, no, you can't do that. It's not WWE. So he said, I want to make these appearances. I want to make all this money. It was great to meet Ric Flair if you never got the chance to do so, as I did last year. But this is the phony outrage that I see from wrestling fans often. You'll see columns, people so upset about Jeff Hardy, like the angle right around Survivor Series. I can't believe WWE would stoop so low as to build on this guy's real life problems by making a fake story about him being found in a hotel stairway and all that implies. But nobody said a word about that promo JBL cut on Shawn Michaels. You know, once in a while you'll hear a promo where it's obviously McMahon's lines in someone's microphone. Yeah. And he had JBL say stuff like, you're going to end up like Ric Flair trying to relive your glory years in high school gyms and all this pathetic stuff. Not a word said about that. What do you make about the way WWE's handled Ric Flair since he left?
I think it's overall it's a disappointment. That huge send-off, only for him to really get buried in promos, and he got stuck right before he left somewhere in that Shawn Michaels, Chris Jericho feud. For a guy that's so legendary, they really just kind of pushed him to the side.
Well, it seems they've always had a love-hate relationship with him, where one year they give him the best send-off wrestling's ever seen, but the year before he was in the pre-show dark match at WrestleMania. Do you realize how upset people would be if WCW put Flair in a pre-show dark match at Starrcade? There'd be fucking riots.
They did with Ric Flair in 3 months what they should have been doing since 2002. Instead of having them being buried and losing to all these nobodies, they said, all right, you know what, we're going to do everything we should have done in 3 months, and we have this big setup to make up for it. Even with what they're saying, it's still not going to erase the great match that him and Michaels had, and like the
absolutely.
send-off. I don't think it's going to take away from that at all.
But it exists in a vacuum, that match, because what they did is what they always do. They planned up to a certain point, and planned for after. Now they knew he was retiring. They planned this great storyline. They did this match with Michaels. And I had low expectations for it. It turned out great.
Well, they pretty much assumed from there on he's going to be, the spokesman to go all over the country.
But that's not a plan. They could have, planned for that. Post Flair retirement, use him for select angles like they did, like you had mentioned with that Jericho and Michaels feud. But again, you got to say, well, he's going to be our legend, and we have to use him a certain way. Otherwise, it's like everything else. It's just not going to end well, because wrestling, especially with Vince McMahon, there's these cycles with these relationships where they love Hulk Hogan 1 week, they bring him in, they hate him, they rip him, they have people speak McMahon's words through their mouth. They're on bad terms, but then Austin's going to the Hall of Fame, so they decide that we're going to have Flair, but now they're not. Poor planning. It's like anything else with WWF.
I just think it's a lot of miscommunication, because when Ric Flair said he wanted to retire from wrestling, I think they took it as if he wanted to retire from the camera. And I got to do all this stuff that we want you to do, and do what you can to make the company look good.
Well, even now, he still says he misses wrestling. and he was really tempted by New Japan's offer to come back and do one more match in Japan, but he wants to leave it with Shawn Michaels, which is where it should stay. But do you guys think that he should have been involved in a title match at WrestleMania in his last fight?
No,
Didn't need it?
I think no. I think the storyline spoke for itself.
One last run, though, with the title?
No, I don't think so.
If that were the case, they should have started the angle way earlier.
Yeah.
They should have had
And then have him have like a 3-month run on the way out.
He should have beat Triple H for it a couple years ago when they had that match on Raw.
Yeah, that was a good match.
But to do it now, the retirement is the proverbial title. You know?
It's kind of sad that that IC title was like his last one.
That moment on pay-per-view at WrestleMania this year was a great moment, and it probably was the height for WWF in pay-per-view terms this year. But for pay-per-views, boy, did they get their ass handed to them by the UFC.
Deservedly so.
Courtesy of their own created star, Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar had his entire career in 2008 for UFC, and he went from losing his first fight to a former champion that he was dominating for 99% of that fight to beating Randy Couture for the title. And in the process, he helped UFC, who was doing great in and of itself, as it was, shoot through the pay-per-view buy rate record.
In 1 year.
And they took the record with Brock being their top draw. The top 3 pay-per-views of their year, all headlined by Brock. Do you think this makes WWF sweat a little?
No.
No?
Maybe the economy's bad, so people might decide if they have, $40, what they're going to buy that month.
So they'd rather spend it on Brock than UFC?
Possibly, but I still maintain that there's completely separate audiences, and they're probably real pissed at Brock because we made him and he's being successful otherwise. But they're like that with The Rock and everybody else who leaves and does better. But I don't think it makes them sweat. They're still going to do what they do, and they're probably going to make a lot of money doing it.
If it doesn't make them sweat,
jealous, maybe.
Why is it that they've mandated to promoters in their local arenas that there can't be MMA events booked for a specific amount of time before or after their events?
I think McMahon still sees it as competition. For example, the thing they wrote on their website about Brock Lesnar at UFC 91, how they're scrambling for matches when that was one of the best pay-per-views that I've seen in a long time.
They did take time in their press release about Brock winning the belt to rip on UFC, which was completely hypocritical and stupid for a million reasons.
Yeah.
But the point
They're
is,
petty about everything, so why should that be any
They still see, regardless if it's boxing, it's still pay-per-view competitive.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's
It's
still
from a business
competitive.
perspective, it's for the dollar that somebody has to spend on.
Yeah, if it's because there are a lot of people like us who are wrestling fans and MMA fans. Now we have to choose. We're gonna spend money in the Rumble. We're gonna spend money in UFC.
I think that's
A lot of people might start spending more money in UFC, and then
You look back at December, you had De La Hoya fight, a UFC fight, and Armageddon. I don't think anybody's going to be willing to spend almost $150 on pay-per-view.
yeah.
Although I do think that the X factor is still the fact that WF has an audience of children and families and things like this.
But
And
children aren't the one buying
And they're not
No,
the
but
ones,
their parents,
money doesn't come out of their wallet.
Yeah, but I still think that if there's an audience that parents buy kids stuff, and if a kid wants to order the Rumble for his birthday party, they're going to order the Royal Rumble.
well, there may be, like you said, business-wise they're competing. WWF always says we compete with TV and movies and all that other crap, which they don't really.
Right.
But everybody does if that's the case.
Yeah.
So when it comes to business-wise, UFC is a hell of a lot closer to what they are than the latest Ben Affleck movie or whatever it might be. But a lot of talk this week about UFC trying to get into Madison Square Garden and get legalized in New York.
Right.
Do you think it would be the biggest kick in the balls if they got MSG like they want to do?
Yeah, and Vince, I believe, last I heard, wasn't even on good terms with the Garden.
Mhm.
There was some kind of story going on. Money, yeah, basically. So if UFC comes in there and kicks their ass in the home turf, that's really just kicking dirt in his face.
Well, time is kicking our ass, and we have to take our first break, so stick with us. We're going to talk more about the year in review 2008 for pro wrestling.
Hey, welcome to the roundtable. Welcome to the glitz and glamour, bright lights.
No, well, 2 shows in, then you get a month.
He hasn't earned his buck yet.
I had
Earned.
Pay
your dues.
This is Eric's yard.
Oh my God.
This is Eric's yard. In this business,
We all split cup.
You don't get the cup gimmick yet.
I'm a second generation, though.
Welcome back to the Wrestling Roundtable. Part of the new talent initiative that we have in Season 2 is getting some more panelists on, some more variety, some different perspectives.
You mean we're building new stars?
Believe it or not,
Wow.
they should learn some lessons from us,
see
Rodney.
that ceiling? It's made of glass.
Joining our panel is Sal Randazzo, a man I've worked with on the indie scene for a couple years on and off. He's done indie shows from coast to coast, from California to Vermont. and everywhere in between. So you've had some experience in wrestling, and it's good to have some more people who have had first-hand experience of some sort on the show. And you're also a viewer, a fan of 17 years. And we'd like to start off, we talked mainly about WWE and some UFC in the first segment. I'd like to talk about the second biggest promotion in the country. Of course, WWE has a profit of like $464 million. TNA just made one of 15. But for them, that's great. That's the first time they've had a profit of that level in the 2 years that they've made a profit. Mainly it's because of their international expansion. They have a problem with their television audience, as I made a joke a year ago, and it hasn't changed like most things in wrestling, is that the rating is the same every week. It's the same million people who watch every week, no matter what, even on the holidays. Good for them, but that audience doesn't buy pay-per-views nearly as much as WWE, and that's even low compared to UFC. A lot of people do leave comments about TNA, and they want to know our opinions on the Main Event Mafia, the big angle that they're doing. I don't see why it's even worth talking about. I see it as the smoke and mirrors it is. Do you guys see it like that?
I look at it even more condescendingly. I just think it's another in a stream of stupid Vince Russo factions where they throw random people together. There's no chemistry. The things they have in common.
They all wear the same suits, though.
Yeah, right, and they look cool in those suits, much like Chris Jericho looks cool in a suit, and thus is great. But I just think it'll be forgotten. You know, 6 to 8 months from now, they'll be on to their next stupid thing. And I mean, there's a lot wrong with it. Sting is supposed to be the top heel, but Kurt Angle does all the talking and all the working, and people still cheer Sting, and he still wears the makeup. So how seriously can you take him as a mafia guy? And you know, you got a lot of people. The only thing good about it is that Scott Steiner is trying again.
I think it's, you know, again, another version of the NWO, and it's just a way of them trying to separate the main eventers from these young stars and way try to put over young stars if, you know, they go up against them. But I don't think it's working. I don't think it's expanding the audience, and I don't think it's changing the ratings, which we proved.
I really do feel, I agree, it's really just like a rehash of things that have already been done. And you have, what, is it 5 guys, you know, taking over a whole company? And it's kind of like in the movies.
Haven't seen that before.
Yeah, well, it's like the opposite of like a Steven Seagal movie where he beats 100 bad guys because they attack one at a time.
Yeah.
In TNA, you know, the baby faces attack one at a time. How many other guys are on the roster that can't take these 5 guys out?
But
You know
look
what
at
I mean?
their
Yeah,
baby
those
faces.
They wear t-shirts and jeans and sneakers.
It looks
Yeah.
ridiculous. Like
It's the size difference alone.
ODB with like a whiskey bottle and like, you know, Apollo Creed or whatever his name is.
Apollo Creed,
Yeah.
And the Motor City Machine Guns look ridiculous with Joe while they're goofing on everything behind his back. You know, everyone seems to like the idea of a young versus old storyline.
It's been beat to death.
Not only has it been beat to death, it's never been done right. The whole idea of a young versus old thing is there's a ton of old guys at the top who are not giving up their spots and shit. So the young guys have to come and take it. Now, that means they have to win, which they're not even really doing. And people are saying stuff to me like, oh, this could finally be Rhino's time. Rhino? What?
Yeah.
3.5 years ago was his fucking time in 05. And they took the belt off him in a
One
day.
day, yeah.
Just remember, he was ECW champion like 10 years ago.
Millionaires Club
As I always say, moving on.
and New Blood, the New Blood Rising, that didn't even work either because the old guys were the faces. It's just so many factors that people just get wrong. I still think maybe sometime there can be an old versus young storyline that could actually work like you would think, but I still don't think anyone's done it so far. But we're talking about year in review, and everyone always talks about what was the standout stuff of the year. So what do you guys think stood out for match of the year in all the matches? Now, obviously we haven't seen Mexico and Japan and tons of other things that other people have seen, but of what we've seen, what do you guys think was match of the year?
Flair and Michaels.
Not only the match itself, but the drama behind it and the meaning and how attentive the audience and TV audience as we were watching were. It was just a great story told.
It exists in a certain context of, you know, Ric Flair's career,
Yeah.
and I think in that context, definitely in the emotion of the match and everything.
It wasn't Samoa Joe, obviously.
No,
but it wasn't.
right.
But the wrestling, like I always maintain, it's about different things. It's not just about the great worked
Yeah,
man.
you knew you were going to see the best of both men.
And probably the best finish I've ever seen in a wrestling match.
And another year, I really loved the Jericho-Michaels ladder match. I thought that was one of the best matches WWE put on this year. But, you know, 5 years from now, people aren't going to remember that. They're going to remember
Well, those
yeah,
two
we'll see.
matches, those two Shawn Michaels matches, have a couple minor flaws in psychology that it's Ric fucking Flair. You're going to overlook that he didn't work the ribs that they worked on in the middle of the match into the finish sort of stuff. I had tears in my eyes when he was walking up the ramp.
And here we go.
Any other year, I think Jericho Cena at Survivor Series is dreadfully overlooked. That was a great match. And any other year, I think that would have been my pick. But I think also Kurt Angle and Samoa Joe really stood out at Lockdown.
You really saw MMA's influence on TNA, especially with that match this year. Just the build-up, the hype videos, having Marcus Davis involved, you know, having Frank Mir commentate the match. That was probably the only TNA pay-per-view that I saw this year because of that match.
Well, it just shows that TNA does not learn from what they do wrong or they do right.
Yeah.
That did almost twice the amount of pay-per-views that the next highest TNA pay-per-view did.
Right.
They did like 55,000 buys, which is huge for them, and they haven't done a thing like
We
it
sent through
since.
Sting and Rhino.
Yeah.
But what do you guys think about for Wrestler of the Year? Who really stood out?
Chris Jericho, I think he's had the best year out of everyone. You know, his comeback with the heel turn, his feud with Michaels, his promos. A great year for a guy that, you know, a couple of years ago we didn't know if we would ever see again. And I think he really carried from, you know, maybe June on till November or so. Really did a good job carrying the show.
I think it was clear in the fall especially that he was carrying the show.
I'll give a tie between Michaels and Jericho. I just think Michaels' body of work. It's fascinating. I can't stand Shawn Michaels, but you can't deny this run since 2002 that he's had of being involved in relevant storylines, excellent matches, reinventing himself. Even this terrible GBL storyline has somehow, you know, seems to have people are intrigued by it. There's some people are intrigued simply because it's so stupid, and that says a lot when you can get something to work that's bad. So who knows?
I'm gonna give the edge. I'm gonna give the edge to Shawn Michaels. The fact that he was in
you, Eric.
you know, between the Ric Flair storyline, even the stuff they did with Batista and Jericho when helping turn Jericho heel, I think he was on point this year.
And his student from Ring of Honor, Eric, go ahead.
Well, I mean, it's easy. Every year, we talk about body of work, and his student Danielson is one of those guys that when you consider his body of work in just 1 year, it's exemplary no matter who he's in the ring with. That match with Austin Aries in Philadelphia at Take No Prisoners was unbelievably good, and people don't even remember it now. They remember his matches with Nigel and Tyler Black and all that sort of stuff. But I think another guy, if we were going to say one from TNA, Kurt Angle. I think he's really resurrected himself in that time period where it was like, you know, I don't know if this is very good, his first year in TNA. I think he's really back on his game.
Yeah,
ever since last year.
The lockdown match with Joe, definitely the best match.
Eugene Nagata in Japan,
and even
AJ Styles.
The Road Dogg match.
Even
the work ethic's always there with Angle.
Well, even with talking about the Main Event Mafia, I mean, you can tell he's really trying his best to, you know, make whatever he can out of that. So yeah, I think he's definitely TNA's top guy this year.
Well, we're trying our best to put out a good quality show, but we've got some deadlines to meet, and coming up next after our break, we're going to be doing the submission round 2, the second Q&A with your questions. Are you going to get our answers? Tune in and find out.
Should we make him do 300 push-ups?
500 squats.
You're going to
Get the deck of cards out. Yeah.
All right.
You got sick of Vicky Guerrero.
Did you see that? The fucking nudes?
No.
Yeah.
I saw that
like,
work. I
they're
didn't
like
see it.
disturbing. Oh god.
Is it really her nude?
Well, it is.
It's blacked out.
They obviously, you know, she
She's
was
just
wearing
like-
something, but they put black bars on it. I am just so happy she's done nude pictures now, because you remember when Vita Guerrero was on the Playboy? I was like, I couldn't hear you on the phone. I was like, Vicky Guerrero? It was right after Eddie died. I was like, she's the Playboy? Like, what the?
Wait. He must be rolling over.
Wait, so it's
No,
not
he's
actually
doing this in his.
Well, there you go. You got your
Jeez.
first.